Have you ever felt the sting of credit being stolen for your hard work? That sickening lurch in your stomach when someone else smiles for the camera, accepting praise for an idea that was born in the midnight hours of your own mind. It's a special kind of pain, one that leaves a scar. But what if it wasn't just a single idea they stole? What if they stole your name, your reputation, your entire future? Welcome to Revenge Pains. I'm your narrator, Serena, and tonight we have a story that cuts right to the heart of that question. It's a story about a man who lost everything, not in a blaze of glory, but in a quiet, calculated act of professional erasure. It's about how the ghost of a past life can haunt the present, and how sometimes the only way to exorcise that ghost is to build a future it can no longer touch. This is the story of Leo Vance, a man buried alive by Silicon Valley's ambition, and his long, calculated journey back into the light. It's a story called Open Source Capital. The year is 2006. The air in the second-floor classroom at Laney College in Oakland hangs thick and heavy, a tired cocktail of stale coffee, industrial disinfectant, and the faint, papery scent of old textbooks. This is the world of Leo Vance, or what's left of it. At 42, he stands before a room of maybe 15 students, their faces illuminated by the pale, flickering glow of their cell phones. His lecture on ethical frameworks in modern business is met with a profound, almost aggressive indifference. The words, once delivered with crisp authority in the pristine boardrooms of Sand Hill Road, now feel like ash in his mouth. They evaporate into the dead air, absorbed by the pockmarked acoustic ceiling tiles. Leo's life has become a study in faded glory. His uniform is a rotation of slightly frayed tweed jackets and perpetually wrinkled button-down shirts, a far cry from the bespoke suits of his former life. His presentation clicks forward from a clunky, wheezing Dell laptop, projecting fuzzy bullet points onto a pull-down screen. It's a relic, just like him. 5 years ago, he was a rising star in the venture capital world, a partner at a prestigious firm, a man whose thoughts on the future of technology were sought after, quoted, and respected. Now, his world has shrunk to the size of this dreary classroom and the small, sparsely furnished apartment he rents a few blocks away. His apartment is a landscape of quiet shame. The walls are bare, save for a single framed photo on his nightstand. A younger Leo, smiling, his arm around a woman who is no longer in his life. The furniture is functional, temporary, as if he expects to be moving on at any moment, even though he's been here for years. It's a life lived in grayscale, a self-imposed exile where every quiet moment is filled with the buzzing specter of what was taken from him. He doesn't just feel like a failure. He feels like a ghost, haunting the periphery of a world that has utterly forgotten him. He spends his evenings alone, grading papers filled with half-hearted arguments or staring at the blinking cursor on a blank document, the book he once planned to write a distant, mocking memory. The ambition that once burned in him like a furnace has been reduced to a single, cold ember of long-nurtured rage. It's a rage he keeps banked and hidden, a secret source of warmth in his otherwise cold existence. The turning point, when it comes, isn't a dramatic confrontation or a sudden revelation. It's the sight of a magazine cover. One Tuesday afternoon, walking home from campus, he stops at a newsstand. And there it is, under the bold, iconic logo of Asterisk Wired magazine, the face of Marcus Thorne. Thorne, his former protege, his Judas. He's smiling that familiar, predatory smile, the one that always made you feel like you were in on a secret, even as he was picking your pocket. The headline glows in neon green, "The Man Who Builds the Future." Leo's breath catches in his throat. His hand trembles slightly as he picks up the magazine. The glossy paper feels slick and obscene under his fingertips. He flips to the profile, and the words leap off the page, each one a fresh twist of the knife. The article is a hagiography, a glowing tribute to Thorne's genius as the managing partner of Apex Ventures, the most powerful VC firm in Silicon Valley. It credits him with a revolutionary investment thesis, a philosophy for identifying and nurturing disruptive innovation, a philosophy that was, in its entirety, Leo's. The article talks about the Thorne Doctrine, a framework for funding companies that challenge incumbent power structures. It was the core of the book Leo was writing, the distillation of his life's work. Thorne hadn't just stolen it, He had perverted it. He used the language of revolution to reinforce a system of cronyism, anointing kings not based on merit, but on their willingness to play his game. Standing there on the sidewalk, with the traffic of downtown Oakland rushing past him, the world fades away. All Leo can see is that smug, triumphant face. The old wound, scarred over with years of shame and resignation, tears open. It's not just anger that floods him, it's a profound, soul-crushing sense of injustice. The system hadn't just failed him, it had celebrated his destroyer. The ghost he had been living with for 5 years, the ghost of his former self, suddenly coalesces. It is no longer a hazy specter of regret. It is a cold, hard entity, and it demands a reckoning. The ember of his rage, so long banked, begins to glow. It's a slow-burning fire, the kind that doesn't flare up and die, but gathers heat until it becomes an inferno. Leo folds the magazine under his arm, his jaw set. The exile is over. The ghost of Sand Hill Road is about to walk back into the world of the living. A couple of weeks trickled by, each day identical to the last, the fire ignited by the magazine cover a low, constant burn beneath the surface of Leo's monotonous routine. He had started a document on his old Dell titled response.doc, but it remained blank. What could he even say? A blog post from a disgraced academic, a letter to the editor. It felt pathetic, like shouting into a hurricane. The world had moved on, and Marcus Thorne was its king. Leo was just a footnote, and a smudged one at that. Then, one Thursday after his afternoon lecture, as the last of the uninterested students shuffled out, a young woman approached his desk. She was clutching a battered IBM ThinkPad to her chest like a shield, and her dark, intense eyes held a fire Leo recognized with a jolt. It was the same fire he used to see in the eyes of the young, hungry founders he once championed. It was the fire he used to have himself. "Professor Vance," she asked, her voice clear and steady. "I'm Anya Sharma. I'm in your evening coding class, but I needed to talk to you about something else." Leo leaned back in his chair, intrigued despite himself. "Go on, Ms. Sharma." "I read your old blog," she said, skipping any preamble. "The one you had back at Northgate Partners. The posts from 01 about democratizing innovation and breaking the kingmaker cycle. And I found an old article about you before." She looked down for a second, a flicker of embarrassment for having brought up the forbidden topic. Leo's stomach tightened. His old blog, he hadn't thought about it in years. It was a digital ghost, a relic of a more optimistic time. "That was a long time ago," he said, his voice flatter than he intended. "The ideas are still relevant," she insisted, her intensity cutting through his practiced cynicism. "More relevant than ever, actually, which is why I'm here. I just got back from a meeting on Sand Hill Road with Apex Ventures." Leo felt a cold prickle on his skin at the mention of Thorne's firm. "Let me guess," he said, a bitter smile touching his lips. "It didn't go well." Anya let out a short, humorless laugh. "That's one way to put it. I met a junior partner who looked like he'd just graduated from prep school. He listened to my pitch for about 5 minutes, his eyes glazing over, and then told me I didn't fit their pattern. He said I should come back when I had a male co-founder, preferably one who dropped out of Stanford." Leo nodded slowly. It was the system he had once railed against, now perfected and institutionalized by Thorne. "What's the idea?" he asked, his curiosity finally outweighing his reflexive caution. "Can I buy you a coffee?" she countered. "It's easier to show you." 20 minutes later, they were huddled over her ThinkPad in a noisy coffee shop nearby, the air thick with the hiss of an espresso machine and the smell of burnt sugar. Anya, seemingly oblivious to the chaos around them, opened a complex series of mock-ups and code snippets. "It's called Open Source Capital," she began, her fingers flying across the trackpad. "The problem isn't a lack of capital, and it isn't a lack of good ideas. The problem is the bottleneck. It's the gatekeepers. A handful of guys in a few square miles of Palo Alto get to decide what the future looks like, and they almost always pick a future that looks like their past." She pulled up a diagram. It was a decentralized, transparent platform. Founders would submit their pitches, business plans, and even code samples. But instead of going to a partner, they would go into a tiered evaluation system. The first tier was algorithmic analysis, checking for market size, business model viability, and plagiarism. The second tier was peer review, a curated pool of verified experts, academics, and even other founders who would vet the idea for a small equity stake in the platform itself. Only the top-scoring projects would then be presented to a syndicate of accredited investors who could browse, ask questions publicly, and fund projects directly. It removes the who-you-know factor, Anya explained, her eyes alight with passion. It replaces the closed-door meeting and the warm intro with a transparent, merit-based process. It lets the crowd, a smart crowd, surface the best ideas. It's a direct assault on the entire relationship-driven system that Thorne and guys like him dominate. Leo stared at the screen, speechless. It was audacious. It was brilliant. It was everything he had preached about all those years ago, but made real, tangible, and weaponized in lines of code. He saw the elegance of it, the inherent morality. It wasn't just a business plan, it was a philosophical statement. It was the perfect counter-narrative to the Thorne doctrine. His first instinct, born of 5 years of fear, was to shut it down. "Anya, this is incredible," he began, his voice low. "But you have no idea what you're up against. Marcus Thorne doesn't just run a firm, he runs the valley, he controls the narrative. The moment he sees this as a threat, he won't just compete with you. He'll crush you. He'll make sure no one funds you, no one works for you, no one even takes your calls." He was speaking from the raw, painful memory of his own execution. Anya didn't flinch. She simply looked at him and said, "I know, that's why I need you. I can build the platform, but I can't fight the war. You know how he thinks. You know where the bodies are buried. You wrote the playbook he's using." She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "When I read that Wired * article, I was disgusted. But when I read your old blog, I felt hope. You were right then, and you're right now. This is how we fight back. Not by trying to get a seat at their table, but by building a whole new table." Her words sliced through the layers of his cynicism. She wasn't just offering him a consulting gig. She was offering him a second chance. A chance to not just clear his name, but to prove that his entire life's philosophy wasn't the naive dream of a disgraced has-been, but a viable, powerful force for change. For the first time in 5 years, Leo felt that old, familiar flicker of purpose. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The ghost of his past was no longer just a source of pain. It was a source of knowledge, of strategy. He looked at Anya, at her fierce, unwavering belief, and then back at the elegant architecture of open-source capital on her screen. It was more than a weapon. It was an answer. "Okay," Leo said, the word feeling foreign and powerful on his tongue. "Okay, let's do it." The decision hung in the air between them, heavier than the steam from their coffees. He had just stepped out of his self-imposed exile. He was back in the game. And this time, he wasn't just playing for money or prestige. He was playing for redemption. The next few months were a blur of creation, a frantic, exhilarating period of rebirth. Anya's cramped Palo Alto garage, once home to a dusty minivan and neglected gardening tools, transformed into the buzzing nerve center of open-source capital. Whiteboards covered every vertical surface, scrawled with complex algorithms, user flow diagrams, and server architecture plans. The floor was a minefield of empty pizza boxes, discarded coffee cups, and tangled Ethernet cables. The air hummed with the quiet whir of server fans and the rhythmic clacking of keyboards, a sound that for Leo was the music of resurrection. He felt a sense of purpose he thought was gone forever. The musty smell of the college classroom was replaced by the clean, electric scent of new hardware. The bored, vacant faces of his students were replaced by Anya's focused, intense gaze as she wrestled with a particularly thorny coding problem. He was alive again. He hadn't felt this way since the early days at Northgate, when the future of the internet felt like an uncharted continent they were mapping for the first time. Anya was a force of nature. She coded with a rare combination of speed and elegance, building the backend of the platform with a fierce, almost obsessive dedication. Leo, meanwhile, fell back into his old role as strategist and evangelist. He worked his dormant network, dusting off old contacts and rekindling relationships that had gone cold for 5 years. Most of his calls went unanswered. The name Leo Vance, he discovered, still carried the stench of scandal. But a few old allies, men and women who had always been wary of Thorne's meteoric rise, agreed to listen. He secured a meeting with one of them, Julian Croft, an angel investor who ran a small, independent fund and had a reputation for betting on outsiders. Julian had been a friendly rival of Leo's back in the day, a man who shared his distaste for the clubby, insular nature of the big venture firms. The meeting took place in a sterile conference room in San Francisco. Leo, feeling self-conscious in his best tweed jacket, led the presentation, laying out the philosophy and the market opportunity. Then he turned it over to Anya, who walked Julian through the live prototype. She was brilliant. She didn't just present the platform, she articulated the movement behind it. She spoke of a future where the best ideas won, regardless of pedigree or connections. Julian was visibly impressed. He peppered Anya with technical questions, his skepticism slowly melting away into genuine excitement. "She's the real deal, Leo," Julian said after Anya had stepped out to take a call. "And the idea, it's a category killer. It's the kind of thing that could fundamentally re-architect how this business works." He leaned back, a grin spreading across his face. "It's also monumentally dangerous. You're not just building a company, you're poking a bear. A very, very big bear." "We know," Leo said quietly. "Good," Julian replied. "Send me the deck. My lawyer will have a term sheet for you by the end of the week. Let's give the bear something to worry about." Leo and Anya left the meeting walking on air. It was happening. The term sheet, even for a modest seed round, was validation. It was proof that they weren't crazy, that open-source capital was more than just a garage project. That night, they celebrated over cheap champagne, the bubbles fizzing with the intoxicating energy of their first victory. The relief was short-lived. The day before the term sheet was due to be signed, Julian called. The jovial, confident tone was gone, replaced by a strained, apologetic whisper. "Leo, I'm so sorry," he began. "I can't do it, I have to pull out." Leo's heart sank. "What? Why? Julian, you loved it, you said so yourself." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Leo could hear the faint sound of cars in the background. "I got a call this morning," Julian said, his voice barely audible. "It was just a friendly chat, about the market, about some of our shared portfolio companies. Nothing was said directly, you understand. Nothing ever is." Leo closed his eyes. He knew exactly what was happening. It was Marcus Thorne, wasn't it? Another pause, this one even longer. "He mentioned he heard you were back in the game," Julian finally admitted, the words heavy with resignation. "He talked about the importance of stability in the market. He said it would be a shame if some of my most promising companies suddenly found themselves facing a well-funded, more experienced competitor." It was a veiled threat, but it had all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Thorne was reminding Julian that Apex Ventures could crush his entire portfolio without breaking a sweat. "Leo, I'm sorry. I have LPs to answer to. I have a family. I just can't afford to be on the wrong side of Marcus Thorne." The line went dead, but Leo kept the phone pressed to his ear, listening to the dial tone. The silence was deafening. Nothing was said directly. That was Thorne's genius. His power was a ghost, an invisible force field that warped the world around it. He didn't need to throw a punch, he just needed to whisper in the right ear. The next blow landed 2 days later. Anya had been aggressively recruiting a brilliant back-end engineer, a woman she'd worked with at a previous startup. They were close to a deal, just finalizing a small equity offer. Then, the engineer went silent. When Anya finally got her on the phone, she was flustered and apologetic. She just accepted a staggeringly lucrative offer from a hot new startup, a company that had just closed a massive Series A round. A company, Leo discovered with a 5-minute search, that was funded by Apex Ventures. Anya slammed her laptop shut. "He's toying with us," she said, her voice tight with fury. "He's not even trying to hide it." Leo stood by the whiteboard, staring at the architecture of their dream. Thorne hadn't declared war. He hadn't even acknowledged their existence publicly. He had just fired 2 quiet, precise warning shots. He had gotten wind of Leo's return and was demonstrating the sheer, effortless scale of his influence. He was quietly closing doors, poisoning wells, and reminding Leo that the game was still rigged. The confrontation was no longer a theoretical possibility for the future. It was real, it was here, and they were already losing. The Kingmaker's shadow was long enough to cast their small garage, and their even smaller hopes, into a deep, chilling darkness. And now, a thought from your narrator, Serena. Have you ever felt that? That invisible wall. It's not someone telling you no. It's the sound of doors quietly closing. It's the calls that don't get returned, the opportunities that evaporate without explanation. It's the chilling realization that you're being frozen out by a power you can't see and can't fight. It's one of the most insidious forms of control because it makes you question your own reality. Are you failing, or are you being failed? Leo and Anya were learning that in Silicon Valley, the most powerful weapon wasn't money or technology. It was influence. And Marcus Thorne had an endless supply. The weeks that followed plunged the garage into a grim, tense silence. The initial exhilaration of their project had curdled into a slow-burning dread. They were adrift, their momentum stalled. The small pile of cash they had pooled from their personal savings, Leo's meager pension fund and Anya's life savings, was dwindling at an alarming rate. Every server cost, every software license, was another grain of sand slipping through the hourglass. Thorne's silent blockade was absolute. Every venture firm they contacted, even the smallest and most obscure, suddenly went cold after an initial conversation. The pattern was always the same: initial excitement, a request for more information, and then impenetrable silence. Leo knew Thorne's network of whispers was working perfectly. They were being blacklisted in real time. The pressure began to fray the edges of their partnership. The garage, once a sanctuary of collaborative energy, started to feel like a cage. Morale hit rock bottom. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. Anya had been staring at the same block of code for hours, her face pale with exhaustion. She finally pushed back from her desk with a sharp, scraping sound. "This isn't working, Leo," she said, her voice devoid of its usual fire. She gestured around the garage, at the whiteboards filled with what now looked like desperate scribbles. "We're building the most elegant ship in the world, but we're trapped in a bottle. We have no money, no runway, and no prospects. Every door is locked." Leo started to give one of his practiced, reassuring speeches, but she cut him off. "No, don't," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and despair. "Let's be honest. Is this ever going to work as long as I'm tied to you?" The question hung in the air, brutal and direct. It stung Leo more than any public accusation ever had, precisely because he had been asking himself the same thing every sleepless night. Anya's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't back down. "I believe in this platform. I believe in what we're building. But we're not just fighting Marcus Thorne's influence, we're fighting your past. Your ghost is haunting this project. Every investor we talk to doesn't just see open source capital, they see Leo Vance, the disgraced partner. They see the risk. They see the baggage. Am I wrong?" He couldn't answer. She was right. He had been so focused on Thorne's tactics that he hadn't seen his own. He had been playing not to lose, haunted by the specter of his first public humiliation. His strategy was reactive, cautious, always looking over his shoulder. He was trying to win a knife fight using debating rules. Anya hadn't just built a platform, she had built a revolution. And he was anchoring it to the old world, the very world they were trying to disrupt. His caution wasn't wisdom, it was fear. Anya saw the recognition in his eyes and her anger softened into exhaustion. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "but I don't know what else to do. My dream is suffocating in this garage, Leo." She left, and Leo was alone amidst the quiet hum of the servers, each one a clock ticking down to their extinction. He sank into her chair, the warmth a faint echo of her fiery presence. He stared at her monitor, at the thousands of lines of pristine code she had written. It was logical, elegant, and ruthlessly efficient. It was a system built on the principles of transparency and merit. A world where good ideas rose to the top based on their intrinsic worth, not on the political games of the people who proposed them. He contrasted that clean, beautiful logic with the murky, whispers and handshakes world of Marcus Thorne. A world of backroom deals, of silent threats, of power derived from who you could exclude. And in that moment, under the cold, fluorescent lights of the garage, Leo had a moment of profound, painful clarity. He had been fighting darkness by hiding in the shadows. He was trying to beat Thorne at his own secretive game, a game Thorne had perfected and Leo was terrified of playing again. It was a losing strategy. Anya was right. The baggage was his, and only he could discard it. He realized he couldn't just build a new table, he had to set the old one on fire. This was the pivot, the shift from defense to offense, from fear to fury. He went to his laptop and did not open response.doc. Instead, he navigated to a simple, anonymous blogging platform. He created a new site, naming it with a single, defiant word: The Heretic. Fueled by a potent mix of righteous anger and the strongest coffee he could brew, Leo began to write. He wrote all through the night, the clatter of his keys the only sound in the sleeping house. He didn't name Marcus Thorne. He didn't name Apex Ventures. He didn't mention his own story. He didn't have to. Instead, he performed a clinical, masterful dissection of the entire kingmaker model of Silicon Valley venture capital. He exposed it not just as morally bankrupt, but as inefficient, lazy, and fundamentally bad for innovation. He used the language of systems analysis, the cold logic Anya had built into their platform. He wrote about the pattern matching that led to a homogeneous class of funded founders. He wrote about the proprietary deal flow that was just a euphemism for cronyism. He detailed how the obsession with creating monopolies and 100x returns stifled incremental, foundational technologies in favor of flashy, consumer-facing apps. He framed the entire VC structure as a feudal system, where the kings stifled true genius to maintain their own power, funding court jesters and sycophants while the real revolutionaries were left outside the castle walls. It was a philosophical declaration of war, not against a man, but against a system. In the final paragraphs, his prose shifted from analysis to prophecy. He spoke of a new model, a decentralized and transparent meritocracy that was not just possible, but inevitable. A system where truth and transparency were not weaknesses to be exploited, but the very foundation of a more efficient, more creative, and more lucrative market. The future, he wrote, cannot be built by kings. It must be built by the crowd. A new model is coming. As the first gray light of dawn crept into the garage, he reread the thousands of words he had written. It was the best thing he had written in his life. It was the core of his old book, but sharpened with the pain of experience and ignited by the fire of Anya's belief. With a steady hand, he clicked publish. He didn't know it yet, but the post had already been submitted to Hacker News by an early reader. From there, it would jump to niche tech forums, to the private email lists of disgruntled engineers and passed-over founders. The manifesto of the heretic began to silently, virally spread through the digital underground of Silicon Valley, a samizdat for a generation of innovators who were tired of begging for permission to build the future. Leo had just thrown a match into a forest he didn't even know was dry. The effect of the heretic was unlike anything Leo had anticipated. It didn't explode into the mainstream. It smoldered. The post was discussed not on major news sites, but in the deep, influential channels of the tech world. Hacker News, Lambda the Ultimate, and the private Slacks of engineering teams at major companies. It became a point of conversation among the people who actually built things, the ones who had long felt that the capital allocation system was profoundly broken. The anonymity of the heretic was key. It allowed the ideas to be debated on their merit, free from the baggage of any single personality. One of the people who read the manifesto was named Daniel Chen, an old colleague of Leo's from his pre-disgraced days. Daniel, a brilliant but prickly engineer, had left the VC world years ago after cashing out from an early dot-com success. He now operated as a quiet but incredibly wealthy angel investor, funding obscure, deeply technical projects that firms like Apex Ventures wouldn't touch. He despised Thorne's methods, viewing him as a slick salesman who couldn't tell a sorting algorithm from a souffle. Daniel recognized Leo's intellectual fingerprint all over the manifesto, the unique blend of market theory, ethical philosophy, and technological optimism. He did some digging, made a few calls, and within a week, he was on the phone with Leo. "I always knew you had that in you, Leo," Daniel said, his voice a dry crackle over the phone. "That was the book you were always supposed to write. So what's the punchline? Are you just a pamphleteer now, or are you actually building the guillotine?" Leo, for the first time in weeks, laughed. He told Daniel everything. About Anya, about open source capital, about Thorne's invisible blockade. Daniel was silent for a moment. "Good," he finally said. "It's about time someone did this. Thorne's a cancer on this valley. Consider your seed round closed. I'm in. It's not much, but it's enough to get you out of the garage and into the fight." The investment was a lifeline. It wasn't just the money. It was the validation from someone respected, someone outside of Thorne's sphere of influence. The small victory felt monumental. They rented a tiny office space, hired their first engineer, the same one Thorne had poached, who eagerly jumped ship to join a mission she believed in, and for a few weeks it felt like the tide was turning. But they had made a critical error. They had mistaken a quiet victory for a decisive one. Thorne, who had been content to swat Leo away with casual, dismissive displays of power, now saw something far more dangerous. The heretic wasn't just a nuisance, it was an ideological threat. The blog was gaining traction, giving a voice to the disenfranchised and questioning the very foundation of Thorne's power base. Combined with a newly funded competitor, Leo was no longer just a ghost from the past. He was an active and credible threat. And Marcus Thorne had a standard-issue response for active and credible threats: total annihilation. He made one phone call to his most vicious and loyal asset, Gavin Finch. Finch was a notorious tech blogger, a man who had built a lucrative career on character assassinations. He ran a widely read column on a major tech news site, and his currency was access, exclusive leaks and damning inside information, almost all of which came directly from Marcus Thorne. Finch owed his entire career to Thorne, and when the king called, the executioner sharpened his axe. The hit piece dropped a week later. It was a masterpiece of malice, a brutal and devastating public takedown. The headline alone was a gut punch. "The bitter has-been and the naive coder, inside the desperate scam of open-source capital." The article didn't just attack the company. It eviscerated Leo and Anya personally. It framed the entire project as a pathetic, last-ditch effort by a disgraced and bitter former VC to exploit a naive young founder for his own vengeful ends. Finch rehashed every single one of the original, fabricated smears against Leo from 5 years ago, embellishing them with new, completely invented details. He painted Leo as mentally unstable, fraudulent, and vindictive. He quoted anonymous sources, clearly fed to him by Thorne, who described Leo's erratic behavior in his final days at Northgate. For Anya, the treatment was arguably worse. She was portrayed not as a brilliant innovator, but as a helpless pawn, a talented but gullible girl who had been taken in by a charismatic predator. Finch used her age and gender against her with slick, condescending prose, effectively stripping her of all agency and reducing her to a victim in Leo's psychodrama. The public attack was devastatingly effective. It landed in the mainstream, where nuance goes to die. The story wasn't complex new funding platform challenges established players. It was creepy old guy manipulates young woman in revenge plot. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Daniel Chen called, his voice grim. "The check is on hold, Leo. My partners are spooked. The board is demanding a character and fitness review. My hands are tied." But Thorne wasn't finished. That was just the reputational assault. The second part of the attack was the corporate one. The very next day, Apex Ventures issued a press release. They were announcing Apex Ignite, a new, heavily funded initiative to democratize startup funding. It was a blatant, feature-for-feature copy of open-source capital, but with the backing of Thorne's billion-dollar machine and a planned launch in just 2 months. It was a kill shot. Thorne had smeared their names, choked off their funding, and was now co-opting their own revolution, planning to launch a soulless, corporate version and capture the entire market before open-source capital could even write its first line of production code. They were trapped. Their reputations were in tatters. Their runway was gone, and a ticking clock now threatened to make their entire innovation obsolete. The garage had felt like a cage, but this was a tomb. The darkness they were in was no longer a shadow. It was a physical presence, suffocating them, and Leo felt the familiar, cold dread of his first downfall begin to creep back into his bones. He had thought he was fighting a war of ideas, but he had brought a manifesto to a massacre. "This is Serena again. I have to pause here because this move by Thorne is just surgically cruel. It's a masterclass in modern warfare. First, you assassinate the character, which isolates the target. You make them radioactive. Then, while they're reeling, you steal their idea and use your superior resources to beat them to the market. It's not just about winning, it's about erasing them. Thorne wasn't just trying to make open-source capital fail. He was trying to make it so it never existed at all. It's a terrifying reminder that in the face of overwhelming power, a good idea is often not enough. The office, which had so recently hummed with the energy of new beginnings, fell silent. The hit piece had landed like a neutron bomb, leaving the physical structure intact but killing everything alive inside. The single engineer they had hired, though she professed her loyalty, started spending long lunches on her phone, her face etched with worry. Leo could see the doubt in her eyes. How could you stake your career on a team that had been so publicly and convincingly branded as a fraud and a failure? Leo felt the old despair wash over him, a cold, familiar tide pulling him back into the gray emptiness of his former life. The shame, the helplessness, the feeling of being utterly outmaneuvered by a man who played by no rules, it was all consuming. He started sleeping badly again, the ghost of his first public execution whispering advice to the ghost of his second. He found himself staring out the window for hours, the code on his screen a meaningless jumble of symbols. He was spiraling. But this time, something was different. He was not alone. One evening, as Leo sat in the dark, contemplating the bitter irony of it all, Anya walked in. She flipped on the lights, the sudden glare making him wince. He expected to see defeat in her eyes or worse, accusation. Instead, he saw a cold, hard defiance. "He's an animal," she said, her voice low and steady. "And you don't reason with an animal. You don't try to prove you're not a threat. You put it down." She pulled up a chair and sat opposite him, her gaze unwavering. "I spent the last 2 days crying. I let myself feel all of it. The humiliation, the anger. The way that slimy blogger talked about me like I was some helpless child. I'm done with that now. Giving up is what they expect, it's what he wants. And I am not going to give him the satisfaction." Her strength was like a physical jolt to Leo's system. Her resilience, her refusal to be broken, was a mirror that showed him the depth of his own surrender. In that moment, he saw the path he was on, the one that led right back to his lonely apartment and his lectures on ethics to bored teenagers. And for the first time, that path seemed more terrifying than facing Marcus Thorne. "You're right," Leo said, his voice raspy. "You're right." A new clarity began to form in his mind. The hit piece had made one thing brutally clear. Fighting the current narrative was impossible. The truth didn't matter in a war of headlines. Gavin Finch and Marcus Thorne could print lies faster than Leo and Anya could refute them. They couldn't win by fighting in the present. They had to unearth the original sin. "We can't prove Finch is a liar," Leo said, thinking aloud, his mind starting to whir with strategic possibilities for the first time in days. "But we might be able to prove Thorne is." His focus narrowed onto a single name, a ghost from a past he had tried to forget: Brian Calloway. Brian had been a junior analyst at Northgate Partners back then, a bright, eager kid just out of business school. He was sharp, meticulous, and fundamentally decent, and he had played a key, albeit minor, role in corroborating the lies against Leo. He had been the one to discover the emails that supposedly showed Leo was trying to sabotage a portfolio company. Leo had never believed Brian did it out of malice. He was too young, too inexperienced, and frankly, too good. He had to have been coerced. Leo spent the next 48 hours searching for him. Brian Calloway had not had a stellar career. He wasn't a partner at a VC firm or a C-suite executive. He was a mid-level product manager at a respectable, if unexciting, enterprise software company in San Jose. A classic middle manager, a man who had likely traded his early ambition for the quiet safety of a corporate ladder. A man, Leo suspected, who was carrying a heavy load of guilt. Leo found his email address and sent him a simple, non-threatening message. "Brian, it's Leo Vance. I was hoping I could buy you a coffee and catch up. It's been a long time." To his surprise, Brian responded within the hour. "Yes, of course." They met at a sterile coffee shop in a suburban strip mall, halfway between their two worlds. Brian looked older than his years. His hair was thinning, and he had the perpetually tired look of a man who spent his days in endless meetings. He was nervous, his hands trembling as he stirred his coffee. Leo decided on his strategy. He wouldn't use threats. He wouldn't use blackmail. He would use empathy. He would offer Brian not a deal, but absolution. "Thanks for meeting me, Brian," Leo began, his voice calm and even. "I know this must be awkward." Brian started, then trailed off, unable to meet his eyes. "Before you say anything," Leo continued gently, "I want you to know that I don't blame you. We were all caught in a storm, and you were the youngest person in the room. You did what you had to do to survive." Leo then told Brian about his life for the past 5 years. He didn't embellish it or ask for pity. He just laid it out, the quiet, grinding reality of his exile. He talked about the teaching job, the empty apartment, the feeling of his own name becoming a curse. He talked about Anya and open source capital, about the hope of building something new, and about the hit piece that was a perfect echo of the past. As Leo spoke, Brian began to quietly weep. The guilt he had carried for 5 years, buried under layers of corporate responsibility and family life, came flooding to the surface. "He told me he would destroy me," Brian whispered, his voice choked with shame. "Thorne, he called me into his office. He had a file on me. A stupid, embarrassing thing I had done in college, nothing illegal, but it would have been the end of my career before it even began. He told me I was going to help him restructure the partnership. He gave me the emails. He told me where to find them on the server. He told me what they meant, and I did it. I was 23 years old, and I was terrified." Leo just nodded, letting the confession pour out. After all these years, hearing it confirmed didn't bring anger, only a sad sense of resolution. Then, Brian said something that changed everything. "I knew it was wrong," he said, wiping his eyes. "And I was scared. I didn't think anyone would ever believe me against him, but I kept records, I kept everything." Leo leaned forward. "What do you mean you kept everything?" Brian took a deep breath. "I was a data hoarder, always have been. I backed up my entire work directory every week. Emails, documents, everything. After I left Northgate, I kept the backups. I don't even know why. Maybe I thought one day I would need them to prove I wasn't a monster." He looked up at Leo, his eyes clear for the first time. He was so arrogant, he put it all in writing. The threats, the instructions, the follow-ups, it's all there. "In emails, he sent me from his personal account." Leo's heart was pounding. "Where are these backups, Brian?" "In my attic," Brian replied, "on a stack of old Iomga zip disks." Zip disks. The words were a blast from the past, a forgotten technology from a bygone era. Obsolete, clunky, and utterly, beautifully, offline. They were a time capsule. For 5 years, the irrefutable proof of Marcus Thorne's original sin had been sitting in a dusty box in a suburban attic, waiting. They now had the weapon. Not just a weapon, a truth bomb. A piece of evidence so clear, so damning, that it couldn't be spun, dismissed, or buried under a mountain of public relations spin. It was the source code of the crime. The only question now was not if they would use it, but how, and when to detonate it for maximum impact. The game had changed once again. The final weeks leading up to the TechCrunch Disrupt conference were the most intense of their lives. With Brian Calloway's confession and the promise of the zip disks, the dynamic in their small office had transformed. The oppressive gloom was gone, replaced by a tense, focused, almost feral energy. They had the truth, but the truth was useless if it wasn't deployed perfectly. Thorne's power was in his control of the narrative, in his ability to frame reality. To defeat him, they had to create a moment so clear and undeniable that it would shatter his frame completely. While Leo coordinated with Brian to retrieve the disks, a process that involved buying a used zip drive on eBay and gingerly transferring the aging data, Anya took on a new, urgent mission. She had to get them on stage at Disrupt. TechCrunch Disrupt was the Super Bowl of the startup world, the single most important stage for launching a new product. Getting a spot in the main competition, the startup battlefield, was nearly impossible. But Anya was relentless. She called in every favor. She cold emailed every editor. She found a side channel, a last-minute showcase for disruptive social enterprises. It wasn't the main stage, but it was in the main hall. It was a platform. She secured them a 10-minute slot on the second day. The plan was audacious and incredibly risky. Anya would give the presentation of her life, a brilliant, passionate pitch for open-source capital. Leo, using a press pass secured by Daniel Chen's long-suffering PR person, would manage things from the side of the stage. Brian Calloway, terrified but resolute, would be waiting in the wings. They knew Thorne would be there. And more importantly, they knew Gavin Finch would be there, ready to publicly humiliate Anya during the Q&A, reinforcing his hit piece and finishing them off for good. They were counting on it. They were setting a trap, using Finch's own malice as the trigger. The day of the presentation, the main hall of the conference was a chaotic symphony of ambition. The air was electric with 1,000 conversations, 1,000 deals being made, 1,000 dreams being pitched. Leo found Anya backstage. She was pale, but her eyes were like burning coals. "Are you ready for this?" he asked her quietly. She took a deep breath and nodded. "I was born for this," she said, and for the first time, Leo saw not a brilliant young coder, but a CEO. In the front row, just as they had predicted, sat Marcus Thorne. He looked relaxed, powerful, a king surveying his court. Beside him, like a well-fed vulture, sat Gavin Finch, a smug smirk plastered on his face. When Anya's turn came, she walked onto the stage and into the spotlight. A hush fell over the crowd. She began to speak, her voice clear and resonant. She didn't just present a product, she told a story. She spoke of the tyranny of the gatekeepers, the stifling of innovation, the need for a more transparent, meritocratic world. She unveiled open-source capital not as a company, but as a movement. It was the Heretic Manifesto brought to life, delivered with a passion and charisma that was utterly captivating. The audience was mesmerized. She was giving the speech of her life. As she concluded her 10 minutes, the room erupted in applause. Then came the Q&A as planned. Gavin Finch was the first to the microphone. He sauntered up, his smirk widening. "Anya, a truly inspiring performance," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But my question is about your co-founder. My reporting has shown that Leo Vance is a disgraced and fraudulent figure from the venture world's past. Given his history of manipulation and professional misconduct, how can this audience trust that open-source capital is anything more than his latest, desperate attempt to settle old scores?" The question was a poison dart, designed to invalidate everything she had just said. The crowd murmured. All eyes were on Anya. This was the moment. Before Anya could utter a word, Leo stepped out from the side of the stage and calmly walked to her podium. He took the microphone. "That's a very important question, Gavin," Leo said, his voice amplified throughout the vast hall. "And there is someone here who is much better equipped to answer it than I am." He turned and gestured toward the wings. A hush fell over the auditorium, a silence thick with confusion and anticipation. Brian Calloway, looking terrified but resolute, walked out from the darkness and into the stage lights. He looked like a man walking to his own execution or his own salvation. He stepped up to the microphone Leo offered him. "My name is Brian Calloway," he said, his voice shaking but clear. "And 5 years ago, I helped Marcus Thorne manufacture the lies that destroyed Leo Vance's career." A collective gasp went through the auditorium. In the front row, the smirk on Gavin Finch's face froze and shattered. Marcus Thorne's relaxed posture stiffened, his face turning to stone. In the hushed, cavernous hall, Brian confessed everything. He spoke of the coercion, the threats, the file Thorne kept on him. He explained, step by step, how Thorne had directed him to plant and discover the evidence that framed Leo. As he spoke, something incredible happened. On the giant projection screen behind him, the open-source capital logo dissolved, replaced by the stark, bitmapped text of an old email. "Subject restructuring," the screen blared. "From Marcus Thorne to Brian Calloway. Brian, we need to accelerate the timeline for Leo's departure. The evidence needs to be conclusive. Find me something or I'll find something on you." Another email flashed on the screen. And another. Damning, irrefutable, and broadcast on the conference's live stream to thousands of viewers worldwide. "Leo, from his station at the side of the stage, was feeding the images from the zip disk directly into the presentation deck. Thorne's empire, built on whispers and shadows, was being demolished by a floodlight of truth. The hall erupted into chaos. People were standing, shouting, pointing at Thorne. Cameras flashed. In the front row, Thorne sat for a moment, his face a mask of incandescent fury, before he stood up and strode out of the hall, a phalanx of reporters swarming after him. Gavin Finch had simply vanished. On stage, Brian Calloway stood, tears streaming down his face, a man unburdened for the first time in 5 years. Anya walked over and, in front of the entire tech world, gave him a hug. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The Silicon Valley community, which had once revered Thorne, turned on him with a vengeance. An internal investigation was launched by the limited partners of Apex Ventures, the powerful institutional investors who had funded his reign. Within a week, Marcus Thorne was forced to resign in disgrace. Gavin Finch's publication fired him, his name becoming synonymous with journalistic fraud. The king and his executioner were deposed in a single, perfectly executed blow. Open source capital, meanwhile, was mobbed. Investors who wouldn't return their calls were now begging for a meeting. Founders from all over the world flooded their servers, eager to join the platform that had toppled a tyrant. Daniel Chen's partners tripped over themselves to approve the seed funding. Months later, open source capital was no longer an idea in a garage, but a thriving company in a bustling, open-plan office in San Francisco. The space was loud, chaotic, and filled with the brightest minds Anya and Leo could find. It was the physical embodiment of their new, transparent culture. One evening, Leo stood with Anya by the large windows, looking down at the city lights. Their platform was a runaway success, fundamentally changing the way innovation was funded. They had done it. He expected to feel a sense of triumph, a rush of vindication, a gloating pleasure at Thorne's spectacular demise. But he felt none of that. As he watched his former nemesis's name get dragged through the mud online, there was no joy. There was only a profound and quiet sense of peace. He hadn't won back his old life. He had built a new one. He hadn't just restored his name, he had made the very system that exiled him obsolete. He looked at Anya, who was smiling, not at the success, but at the energy of the team behind them. He realized his redemption wasn't a return to the past or a settling of scores. It was the creation of a better future. He hadn't just beaten his ghost. He had built a world where that ghost could no longer exist. And so Leo Vance's journey comes to a close, or perhaps a new beginning. He set out to reclaim a stolen past, but ended up building a future for everyone. It's a powerful lesson, isn't it? The story shows us that revenge is about tearing something down, leaving you standing in the rubble of your enemy's life, which can often feel as empty as your own. But redemption is about building something better, something that lasts. Leo didn't find peace by destroying Marcus Thorne. He found it by making him irrelevant. He proved that the most disruptive technology of all isn't an algorithm or a platform. It's the truth. His victory wasn't just for himself, but for every innovator who was ever told they didn't fit the pattern. I'm Serena, and this has been Revenge Pains. It makes you think, what is a more powerful force in the long run, the desire for revenge or the drive for redemption? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We read all of them, and your stories matter. Until next time.